Welcome back. Welcome back. This is the People's Voice. I am Trey Evans, and I am the People's Voice. Thank you again for checking out the podcast this week. As always, it is greatly appreciated. As always, we like to thank everyone who has taken some time to listen to the podcast today. We do understand that you could be utilizing that time to do something else. So we are appreciative of you taking that time to listen to the podcast today. As always, if the information is valuable, enlightening, and worth sharing, we ask that you subscribe and turn on notifications for the podcast. That way you'll be notified when each episode is released. And we do put out a new episode each and every Friday, which is heard on all podcast platforms. And then we put a video out on YouTube every Wednesday as well for those who would like to watch the podcast. But in any event, we say thank you and welcome to the People's Voice podcast. So today I want to talk about sex trafficking. I want to talk about sex trafficking today, and sex trafficking here in the United States. And I want to talk about this today because of the recent story that has broke regarding Sean Diddy Combs. And for those who may not know, Sean Diddy Combs was recently arrested and has been charged with a number of counts, or a number of charges, I should say. But one of those charges that he's been charged with, not to double up on the word, he's been charged with sex trafficking. And I want to highlight today because I want to just give an understanding, an explanation of what sex trafficking is, because I think, many people are, not many people, but some people have expressed to me, well, how could he be charged with sex trafficking? So I want to explain what sex trafficking is first, talk a little bit about his case, and then talk about, some of the stats regarding sex trafficking here in the United States, and then we'll close out from there. So, if you haven't heard, again, Sean Diddy Combs has been arrested for not sex trafficking. I think there was 3 counts: conspiracy, I think forced prostitution, and sex trafficking. Let me make sure I get those charges correctly, because I don't want to be out here speaking recklessly. But there are definitely 3 counts that from what I've seen from the charging document. Okay, yeah, so transportation to engage in prostitution, sex trafficking by force, fraud, or coercion, and then the first one was the conspiracy charge, or the racketeering charge, the racketeering. The conspiracy charge, which was count 1, and I'm just going through the document as I'm going through. Yeah, so count 1 was racketeering, conspiracy. So those are the 3 that are listed for Sean Combs in terms of that. But again, I wanted to talk about the sex trafficking portion of it because I think it needs to be highlighted in terms of what's going on here in the United States. So let me give a definition for what sex trafficking is, right? Because we use these terminologies and sometimes people may not know exactly what those are. I'm reading directly here from the United States Department of State, and they have it listed on here on their website. And on their website, it says sex trafficking encompasses the range of activities involved when a trafficker uses force, fraud, or coercion to compel another person to engage in a commercial sex act, or causes a child to engage in a commercial sex act. Now, nowhere in that document did it say Diddy was participating with underage individuals, but sex trafficking does occur with minors and adults as well. It then goes on to say that the crime of sex trafficking is also understood through the acts means, and purpose framework, all three elements are required to establish a sex trafficking crime, except, of course, in the case of child sex trafficking. And then it goes on to break down what acts means and purposes are. So acts are anybody who recruits, harbors, or transports for the purpose of engaging in sex. Means is the element of sex trafficking occurs when a trafficker uses force or coercion, and then the purpose is the element is a commercial sex act. Now, that's important to highlight because in that Diddy case, in that sealed indictment, all of those things that I just covered are listed in there. So literally, they have several different titles that they refer to in terms of the U.S. Criminal Code, Title 18. So under 1591. And listen, I'm not a lawyer. This is not a legal podcast.
I ain't passed the ball, but I know a little bit.
But I'm just reading, from the document, and obviously I have the U.S. Criminal Code in front of me just to make sure that I am accurate. But I'm referring to that because in Diddy's indictment, sealed indictment or charging docs, they list all of those things that I just said in terms of commercial sex acts, coercion, force, using force and coercion and fraud and things of that nature. So that's Diddy's case. Okay, I wanted to use that as a platform. I don't want to go too deep into that. Now, moving on to what's going on here in the United States in terms of sex trafficking. So currently, sex trafficking is a huge issue. I don't want to say a huge issue. Well, it is a huge issue, but it's an issue that's increasingly getting worse. I'm reading here from the Bureau of Justice Statistics, and on their site, and this is from the U.S. Bureau of Justice of Statistics, they have data collection from 2023. The report was published in 2023 where they highlight human trafficking activities. And not only do they break it down from what's going on in terms of just human trafficking overall, but then they also go into what is occurring in terms of sex trafficking. And I wanted to highlight this because I thought it was quite interesting information, specifically when you get into the sex trafficking portion of it. But from their report, it says that almost over 2,000 people were referred to the U.S. Attorney's Office for human trafficking offenses in 2021. That number represented almost a 50% increase. They say 49% increase from 1,300 people that were referred to the U.S. Attorney's Office in 2011. So literally in the span of a decade, the number of human trafficking offenses has increased by 50%. It goes on to say that the number of people that have been prosecuted as a result of human trafficking has also doubled during that time, went from roughly 729 people to over almost 1,700 people within that same decade. The interesting part, not the interesting part, but the breakdown that I really wanted to highlight is when they get into the sex trafficking portion of it. Now, it goes on to say almost 1,200 defendants were charged in federal court for human trafficking in 2021. Out of those 1,200, almost 1,200 people, 92% were male and 60% were white. But what I thought was very interesting was in terms of sex trafficking, it says of the 201 defendants charged with peonage, slavery, forced labor, and sex trafficking in 2021, 77% were male and 58% were black. So this is often, just based on the stats, often this is, and again, I'm reading the numbers here. So
Men lie, women lie. The numbers don't.
This is often, in terms of human trafficking and sex trafficking, led by men. And, disturbingly, what we're seeing is many black men are participating in this. Now, it's only, and I say only not to minimize the crime, but again, based on these statistics, it says 201 defendants. But whether it's one or 201, it is definitely trending and tracking in the wrong direction in terms of the number of cases that have been coming up for criminal prosecution. Now, in terms of cases that have been reported, there have been a number of cases reported to many different jurisdictions, but I'm reading a study here I'm reading some statistics here from the National Human Trafficking Hotline, and this is the hotline that people call to get help, whether they call, email, text, when there are cases of human trafficking, or when they call to report cases of human trafficking. Oftentimes they reach out to the National Human Traffic Hotline. So in any event, in their breakdown, they report that in 2023 there were over 9,600 cases were identified. And now, when they talk about cases, these are not cases that have gone to court or law enforcement has been involved. This is just the number of cases where people have called this hotline or reached out to them via email, text, iChat, chat and things of that nature. But they reported that they've gotten almost 9,600 cases in 2023, and out of those 9,600 cases, almost 17,000 out of those 9,600 cases, there were almost 17,000 victims. In addition, they break it down even further. So out of those 9,600 cases, over 5,000 of those cases were involving sex trafficking, and it goes on to state that a majority of those cases, at least the ones that they've been to identify, have occurred in residential areas. So whether this has been in homes or in apartments and communities, but a lot of the sex trafficking that takes place often occurs, based on this study from the National Human Trafficking Hotline, in residential areas. And then it goes on to break it down, even further, based on the number of adults and the number of females that have been involved in sex trafficking, and then foreign nationals and U.S. citizens. I thought a very interesting portion of this was the number of cases that they also report state by state. And, two of the largest states where this is occurring was Texas, where they had reported over 900 cases in 2023. And then also Florida was another one where they have reported a large number of cases as well in terms of human trafficking that has occurred. But again, within that human trafficking, sex trafficking is also often a part of that as well. And human trafficking can go into just beyond sex. You have forced labor and other areas where human trafficking takes place. But to close out, so there's a commonality with, just based on the information that I've read, there's a commonality with sex trafficking, at least that I identify. I'm not saying it's always the same across the board, because it's often different. It can be different. But in the case of Sean Diddy Combs, not to harp too much on this case, but one thing that I identified was that he is much older than Cassie. And from everything that I read, when they met, he was obviously much older. I think from what I read, they met when he was 19 years old. When she was 19 years old. And then based on the reports, said they made their relationship public by the time she was 21. So not sure if they were involved before that. I don't want to assume. But one of the things that I did notice in terms of the pattern is that typically men are involved in sex trafficking. Many times it's an older man, somehow involved with a younger woman. I did want to play a clip from a victim of sex trafficking, and this is from the where is this from? This is from the FBI, and they have a case here with a woman named Nicole. When she was 17, she was basically put into sex trafficking. And, from her story, I won't go through the whole thing, but she basically met an older guy and he showed her some attention. Now, she was 17 when she first got into this, but I want you to hear the commonality in terms of what she says compared to what's going on in the Diddy case. And then we'll move on from there. So let me just play this from the FBI site.
About 7 months afterwards, I had gotten raped by John, and Juan didn't believe me, and so that was my first beating. And it wasn't so much the beating, it was I got pepper sprayed and put into a shower for 3.5 hours, a cold shower. And I tried to leave, and then it just turned out to be worse. I invested so much time and so much money into Juan that everything was tied into him. I didn't have a house, I didn't have a bank account, I didn't have my own car, I didn't have anything. So if I left Juan, I left everything.
And I'm stopping it there, and I apologize if this is a trigger for anyone. I should have gave a trigger warning before I played that. But as you can hear from her, she was young. They got into a relationship. 7 months later, obviously it turns into something that she's not expecting. And again, in the sex trafficking world, some of the tools of holding people in place that they utilize is violence. And also the fact that she had nothing, right? So if she was to leave, where's she going to go? And that is similar to what is being accused of, or Diddy is being accused of in that charging document. It talks about not only, the sex crimes, but it goes into the physical abuse that he is alleged to have committed. Let me say that he is alleged to have committed. But also, it clearly states in that document, it says Combs ensured participation from the women by, among other things, obtaining and distributing narcotics to them, controlling their careers, leveraging his financial support, and threatening to cut off the same, and using intimidation and violence. So I kind of just wanted to play that to kind of show what that pattern looks like in terms of sex trafficking, because it's common. It's a common practice. So whether you're a multi-millionaire like Sean Diddy Combs, or just some regular individual who, some street individual who decides to sex traffic a woman, the pattern is similar. And, I wanted to highlight that, especially for those of us who have daughters. It is important for us to make sure that we have these conversations with them. Whether you don't have a daughter or not, if you're a leader in the community, the leader in your religious institution, your school, your work, wherever, it is important to make sure that we highlight these conversations and, identify this as soon as possible, because and I just played one case. I mean, I have a ton of stuff here that I could have played, but, I don't want to drag this out. I think everyone gets my point. But sex trafficking in the United States is a problem. It needs to be highlighted. We need to put more emphasis on this. And just like anything else, it starts as a grassroots process with conversations locally, but then it has to move into more stringent policies and prosecutions, which I'm all for when it comes to specifically sex trafficking of anybody, whether it's female, male, or children. So, but that's what I wanted to talk about today. I wanted to highlight that. Like I said, I thought it was important based on what's going on with Diddy, and we'll kind of go from there. But if you want to leave a comment, please feel free to leave a comment on any of the social media platforms. I can be reached at I am Trey Evans on all social media platforms, or you can also reach us at the People's Voice Podcast on Instagram. But that's my time for today. As always, dreams are not just for sleeping. Please wake up and live your dreams. My name is Trey Evans, the People's Voice. Tell somebody about the truth. Salute.